Investors also cheering Elon Musk's optimistic forecast of 20 to 30% growth for Tesla next year. To discuss Tesla's latest quarter, we're joined by longtime Tesla bull Dan Ives, senior equity analyst and managing director at Wedbush Securities. Dan, I know you've got a lot to like within this report. I'm curious, just what was the number one thing that stood out to you that got you the most excited following this print?
Yeah, I think margins. I mean, that's been a huge part of the overhang on this story. They beat by 200 bips, price cuts in the rearview mirror. And when you combine that with that growth forecast, I mean, I did whisper numbers were called 10, 11%. They gave 20 to 30%. It's an Aaron Judge-like quarter.
It's interesting because they teased out more affordable models for the first half of 2025, but then Elon said a $25,000 vehicle would be silly. Is he really prioritizing cheaper EVs? Where do you find the clarity on that?
Yeah, I think you'll have a sub 30K vehicle by first half of next year. And I think that all dovetails into their overall growth forecast, 20 to 30% coming out of the gates for 2025. And now you look at their cost of goods, their ability to produce cars is down ultimately 30, 40%, and could be down another 20, 30% when you look at the next year. It has been a painful year, no doubt, in terms of EVs and softer demand, what we've seen on margins. The renaissance of growth now is, I think, heading into 2025. And then you have AI, autonomous, and I think a lot of the other growth drivers that, to me, it's key to what I see as $1 trillion plus market cap.
So, Dan, I guess 30% growth or up to 30% growth next year, it sounds like you think that's realistic.
Oh, yeah. No, look, the bears that have been bearish since, 100 million market cap, those bears will come out of hibernation mode today. But the reality is that they're going to produce over 2 million vehicles next year. And when you think about the overall growth story, more penetration on the FSD. I think, ultimately more details last night in terms of autonomous, FSD, cybercab. A lot of those details, maybe some left. Robotaxi day, disappointed. I was not. And look, now it's just execution. But to poke holes in this story, I believe the most undervalued AI play in the market.
But when is that autonomous AI growth actually going to be here, Dan? I hear you. I hear what you're saying. You call it the most underpriced AI story in the market. But when is that going to be on the balance sheet as opposed to a story I'm hearing about on the call?
I mean, I think like me and you, we could be in a cyber cab in the next 2 to 3 years. So we're not talking about something that's 5, 10 years down the road. This is something that will, over the coming years, become a reality. And I don't necessarily view this as a negative for Uber. I mean, Lyft obviously has their own issues. But when you look at Tesla, this is going to be the next stage of growth. Autonomous, FSD, AI. But it comes down to you need the deliveries, you need the margins. They're checking every box. I actually thought that was probably the best conference call I've heard from Musk and Tesla in a number of years.
Dan, one of the things that he talked a lot about on that conference call that you're mentioning there is he spent time talking about what he might do in a second Trump term if Trump were to be elected come November. I'm curious just how much of some of this recent momentum or the next several years in terms of their growth prospects hinges upon a Trump victory in November.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it hinges on the Trump victory. I think Trump or Harris, I don't think the growth story vastly changes. I do believe if Trump gets elected second term, it's bearish for EVs because overall the tax credit would essentially go away. But I do believe that it's bullish for Tesla because that ultimately would give them more scale and scope versus other players, and potentially could fast track FSD and some of the other technologies that ultimately we see under a Trump administration. I do think Tesla is part of that, I'll call it Trump trade.
All right, Dan Ives, thanks so much for joining us as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.